Madam President,
Senator from Illinois.
ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, I listened closely to the speech by the Republican Senate leader, and I've heard statements made over the weekend on television. And I think this is a moment where we might consider just a minute or two on Senate 101, so there's an understanding of where we are and why we are at this place. There are 100 members of the Senate. Currently, there are 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. Under the ordinary course of business, which has become extraordinary in this chamber, a majority rules. So 51 votes will pass an amendment or a bill in most cases. However, there's a creature in the Senate known as a filibuster. And the filibuster requires that 60 votes be found in order to prevail on a motion or a measure. The filibuster raises the requirement from a simple majority to 60 votes. The senator from Kentucky knows that as well as I do. He's been here longer than I have. That filibuster makes all the difference in the world. So to argue the Democrats have a majority, why don't they just take this majority and do their business, is to ignore the obvious. What the Republicans have decided to do is, for the first time, perhaps ever, I don't want to say that without checking the record for sure, but certainly in modern history, to require that when we pass the debt ceiling, we need to have 60 votes on the floor of the Senate. Well, it's no great revelation that with 50 Democrats, we would need 10 Republicans, and the Senate Republican leader has made it clear he ain't giving us a vote, not one. And so we've come to a standstill. We're 2 weeks away from a default. For the first time in the history of the United States, that we would default on our debt. It's as if America had a big home and a big mortgage and decided 1 month not to pay on the mortgage. Well, let's hope the day would come when the payment would be made. But in the meantime, there's a serious question then raised about the credit reputation of the United States. And that is exactly the fire that the Republicans are playing with by imposing a filibuster on this simple measure. They know that they can stop us as long as 60 votes are needed, and they give none. One of our colleagues, Senator Whitehouse, made an interesting observation in our caucus lunch last week. I hope you'll forgive me if I try to paraphrase it. But he said many people argue that we need a filibuster because it really encourages bipartisanship. You've got to come together. You've got to look for a compromise. Well, how do you compromise when the debt ceiling question is whether you do it or don't do it? And that's what's at stake here. Are we going to acknowledge the debt of the United States to its creditors far and wide and continue the business of this economy and this government? The Republicans say, no, we'd rather play fire with it. But they leave out that one element that is so critical. It is their decision, their filibuster that stops this. I believe that Senator Schumer and the Democrats will offer them this opportunity again this week. Senator Schumer has said as much. But it really troubles me that we're at a point in our history, recovering from this pandemic, businesses getting back on their feet, employees that need to go back to work, and the Republicans have taken this strategy of defaulting on the national debt. And as far as the characterization of what reconciliation will do, Senator McConnell continues to come to the floor repeatedly and say, it will hurt families. Well, one of the provisions in the reconciliation bill, which I hope survives our compromise negotiation, will help families find affordable, quality daycare. When you look at the fact that the vast majority of those who are not returning to work are women, you understand the circumstances. Many of them question whether or not school is going to be in person or by Zoom. They question whether or not they can find affordable health daycare in any direction, and they question whether they can afford it once they find it. If we took that worry off the family plate and said we are going to make sure that you have accessible, affordable family care for your children, think of the relief it would give and the fact that many would return to the workplace. According to Senator from Kentucky, Senator McConnell, that hurts families. Hurts them? It helps them in ways that many of us don't even understand. Can you imagine frantically leaving a child at home in the care of someone you don't quite trust because you have no alternative but to go to work and try to earn a paycheck to feed that child and pay the rent? I wouldn't want to be in that desperate situation. I wouldn't want any of my family to face it. To say that hurts families to do that is certainly wrong. It would help them if reconciliation includes that measure. We also have a pre-K program to give kids who struggle a helping hand and a fresh start. We know the Head Start program that was created, I guess, almost 60 plus years ago, has had positive results in preparing people to go to college. Yes, Head Start programs when they were young children, 3, 4, and 5 years old, can make a difference in their lives, how they learn and what they do. So we want to make that the official policy of this country, that we have 2 years of pre-K education available to families. I think they'll thank us for it, and in future, their generations that are helped with this will thank us as well. And the notion of extending the school year from K through 12 to K through 14 to put 2 years of community college without cost for families is an extraordinary commitment. There was a time in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century when America decided to make a big, bold experiment. It was called high schools. Up until that point, most families were lucky to get kids through 8th grade. The rich families, the ones in well-positioned, would take them to high school. Well, we decided to make high school a universal national experience in America. So you wouldn't quit at the 8th grade, you'd finish in the 12th grade. Did it result in anything good for us? Take a look at the 20th century. With an educated, motivated workforce, America led the world. It's no accident that extending education brought us to that moment. Now Joe Biden, and many of us agree, believe that the 21st century is a brand new set of challenges. And putting 2 more years that you don't have to worry about going deep in debt or affording onto a person's education gives them a better chance. Some will go to college. Some will develop skills that they need to get into the workforce and succeed. And some will have an experience which changed their lives. That's what this additional 2 years will be. Senator McConnell thinks an additional 2 years of free higher education hurts American families. What is he thinking? I don't know what it's like in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, but just north of it in Illinois, we appreciate education and how it liberates, motivates, and educates young people to be part of the future. So I would say to Senator McConnell, understand Senate 101. Your filibuster is stopping the extension of the debt ceiling. And that stopping of the extension is going to jeopardize our credit rating, raise interest rates, and cost 6 million American jobs, according to the best economists. Why would we do that to America at this moment in history? We should be doing just the opposite, everything we can to help. Madam President, I ask consent to return to my statement that I was making earlier when I voluntarily
Without objection.
surrendered the floor. Thank you. I noted that the shadow docket in the Supreme Court was a subject of a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee last week. It's one of those esoteric subjects you wonder if anybody will even notice. We thought it was important enough to talk about it in light of the Texas abortion statute. We noted the fact that in the last 4 years, there were 36 times when the Trump administration asked for the shadow docket to be used. The court granted 28 of those Trump Justice Department administration requests. In the previous years, under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, 16 years, 8 requests, 4 were granted. 4 versus 36. You can tell that something is happening in the court. The day after our hearing, someone happened to notice. That person was Justice Samuel Alito. He made headlines for a speech he gave at Notre Dame Law School, criticizing lawmakers, I suppose that's myself and the presiding officer, journalists and scholars who raised concern about the court's use of a shadow docket. There doesn't appear to be a publicly available transcript or full recording of the speech given by Justice Alito. So I ask unanimous consent to enter into the congressional record an article from the Hill newspaper entitled, quote, Alito bristles over criticism of Supreme Court shadow docket.
Without objection.
Thank you. In a speech, Justice Alito reportedly zeroed in on our Senate Judiciary Committee hearing last week and criticized one of the experts who testified, University of Texas law professor Steve Vladeck. He also reportedly criticized an article by a respected journalist who writes about the court frequently for a major magazine. Justice Alito derided the phrase shadow docket as a, quote, catchy and sinister term meant to convey something sneaky and dangerous. In fact, the phrase shadow docket was coined by a University of Chicago law professor, William Bode, who incidentally clerked for Chief Justice Roberts and has spoken more than 30 times at Federalist Society events. Justice Alito dismissed concerns about the shadow docket. He said, the media and political talk about the shadow docket is not serious criticism. What he failed to mention, however, is that some of the strongest warnings about the court's changing use of the shadow docket have come not from politicians like ourselves or journalists, but from Justice Alito's colleagues on the court. Our hearing in the Judiciary Committee highlighted how Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, Breyer, and even Chief Justice Roberts sounded the alarm about the Supreme Court's shadow docket ruling on the Texas abortion ban. Justice Sotomayor said of the court's shadow docket decision on the Texas law, and I quote, the court's order is stunning, presented with an application to enjoin a flagrantly unconstitutional law engineered to prohibit women from exercising their constitutional rights and evade judicial scrutiny. A majority of justices have opted to bury their heads in the sand. Quote from Justice Sotomayor. How about Justice Kagan? Expressed alarm that the court's shadow docket decision-making, quote, every day becomes more unreasoned, inconsistent, and impossible to defend. The justices made it clear that the court's shadow docket handling of SB 8 in Texas raises urgent concerns that American people should be aware of. That's why we had the hearing. For example, Chief Justice Roberts noted that Texas has now created, quote, a model for action, in his words, showing how states can undermine constitutional rights by using that bounty hunter example enforcement scheme that avoids judicial scrutiny thanks to the shadow docket. Lawmakers in a number of states are eyeing this procedure to try to copycat Texas's enforcement model. That ought to trouble anyone who cares about our Constitution. With its order on the Texas abortion ban, the court's majority has also shown its willingness to use the shadow docket to allow flagrantly unconstitutional laws, in the words of Justice Sotomayor, to take effect, at least when the laws align with the majority's ideological beliefs. As a result, millions of Texans have had their constitutional rights stripped away, and the rights of all Americans are less secure. That is a major change that demands serious discussion. Justice Alito may bristle at perceived criticism of the court's practices, but that doesn't mean the court should be immune from scrutiny from the American people, a free press, even the legislative branch of government. Historically, Congress has played an important and essential role in debates over the proper functioning of the courts. First and foremost, it's the Senate's advice and consent that results in the appointment of men and women to the Supreme Court. In addition, many aspects of the Supreme Court's operation, including the starting date of the court's fall term, are established by an act of Congress. In fact, much of the court's jurisdiction is set by Congress. Congress is asked regularly by the Judicial Conference to pass new legislation governing the operations of the federal judiciary, and justices have routinely come before Congress to discuss their request and a wide range of other matters. In March 2019, for example, Justice Kagan testified before the House Appropriations Committee about such topics as whether the Judicial Code of Conduct should apply to the Supreme Court. With her that day was none other than Justice Alito. The Senate Judiciary Committee has frequently and appropriately been the forum for many debates over the Supreme Court's operations. I remember in 2011 when Justices Scalia and Breyer appeared before the Judiciary Committee for a wide-ranging discussion on the role of judges under the Constitution. Our committee also has robust debates about appropriate degree of transparency in the court's operation. Earlier this year, the committee approved bipartisan legislation to allow cameras in the Supreme Court so that all Americans can see what's going on. We're going to continue this debate in the Judiciary Committee over the shadow docket. It's not politicizing the court to do so, and Republicans have no standing to accuse Democrats of politicizing the court, especially after their unprecedented, politically motivated blockade of President Obama's Supreme Court nominee in 2016, and their haste to confirm a third Trump justice mere weeks before the 2020 election. both acts of raw political power. Madam President, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.